So we're going to talk about the Mandalorian shoes today and how you can make your own Mandalorian shoes without ruining the shoes underneath. So as promised, this is part 1 of the process making journey of how to make the Din Djarin outfit from The Mandalorian. And we're going to focus on one of the main accessories of this outfit, which are the shoes, which is actually the first detail or the first part of the entire outfit that I actually made of this Mandalorian armor costume. Actually, at that moment, I hadn't really decided I was going to make a complete outfit from head to toe of the Mandalorian outfit. I just wanted to make the actual shoes and then make sort of a Star Wars universe looking outfit. But once I had made those and made them actually look exactly like the ones from the show, well, if I decided to take all this time to create shoes that are exactly the same as the one in the show, then why don't I just spend all this time to create a complete outfit of all the parts that makes this outfit? And that's what I did. But I still am far from finished. So I'm going to explain how I did this, and let's get into the kitchen. So, as mentioned, these are going to be the easiest part of this entire outfit. And these are the Mandalorian shoes or boots. What's great about these shoes compared to, for example, the armor is that these doesn't have to be perfect. They're supposed to be very worn and look like they have been through a lot and are full of dust, and they're supposed to just be good shoes for different kind of environments. So they're supposed to be very tough, but they're not supposed to look like beautiful or anything. They're just supposed to do its work. I have seen others that have made these shoes and they have used a specific brand. They are sort of like Chelsea boots in the style. Sadly, they are only in men's sizes, so they are definitely too large. And for me, I knew which shoes they use in the show, or at least what people sort of figured out which shoes they're using in the show. And I found that they actually had those shoes on Amazon, but like I said, they are men's sizes, so even though I was able to purchase those, I would not be able to get those in the size that I have, and I have very small feet. These ones are size 4, so I have very small feet, so I needed something that had my size, and I wanted something that was also leather shoes. I wanted to find some shoes that were as close as possible to the shoes that they suspect they used in the show and then just covered up with some leather pieces. It has to do with the fact that when you have applied these leather pieces on top of the surface of these shoes, once you're going to do the weathering effect, you actually can see the original shape of the shoes peek through underneath, giving this kind of shadow effect. And I knew that I wanted to find shoes that got that effect if I covered those with leather. So I managed to find these shoes. They are Australian shoes. They are called Blundstone, and they were perfect measurements for my feet, and they were 100% leather, and they are Chelsea shoes, and the sole of these shoes reminded me a lot of the shoes they were using in the show. I was super happy that I found these shoes, but one thing about it is that these are like high quality shoes. They are 100% leather, so they are not cheap shoes, and I did not want to ruin these shoes since I spent a lot of money on these, covering them up with a lot of glue and destroying the surface of these shoes. So I'm going to explain to you what I did to cover these boots up and make them look like the Mandalorian shoes without ruining the original shoe underneath. So I'm going to show you a lot of pictures now of the process of how I worked on these boots. First of all, I wanted to find a lot of reference pictures, so I knew what this style and what colors of leather they used. And they had a lot of large pieces on this shoe that were like grayish toned leather, and I didn't want to spend a lot of money on large pieces of leather in a gray tone just for some tiny flaps on these shoes. And I managed to find on one of the arts and crafts stores that we have, and they actually had leather spill pieces that they sold in large bags, and they had some that were just natural leather, brown leather, and then they had a mix bag of leather spill pieces that were in different colors, and they especially had this gray tone, and also some of the pieces were like beige and brown. So they had pieces in that mixed bag that were the perfect color variations for these boots, and that bag cost me like not more than like $10, and that was perfect because then I didn't have to buy a large piece of leather just for some smaller parts of these boots. This is the bag that I got, so it definitely has a lot of colors. It has black, red, white, beige, brown, and obviously they had some of these gray pieces, and I looked through this bag to find the pieces that looked the perfect size that would fit the area and surface of the boot where I wanted to actually have that shade. So it was these flaps here are gray, and then we have the front here that has this gray piece, and the rest are beige here, and then we have these reddish brown leather or brown leather on the sides and the back piece. And the perfect thing about these leather pieces was that they looked very worn and wrinkly and very used look, so they had a lot of textures on them. They weren't like perfect even leather pieces. They already had sort of a vintage style to them, so they were definitely going to work perfect for the look I was going for. So just to see if you can find an arts and crafts store that sell these leather spill pieces, and if they have some kind of mixed colors, and if you can find those that have these gray tones. If you don't, then maybe try and see if you can find some faux leather pieces, vinyl pieces that has this gray shade and these beige and brown tones, and work from there. You can still add this vintage, worn, dirty effect even though you're not using real leather. So first of all, to create a protective surface on these boots, I decided to cover up the entire surface using some masking tape, because the sticky surface on that tape isn't going to leave a sticky residue. It's not going to be that damaging than if you would have covered the entire boot with the contact adhesive or a very strong kind of tape. And once the surface was covered up, I could actually mark out on the masking tape where all the pieces are going to be, so I could get a perfect measurement of how wide and what kind of shape each part needed, because they were drawn right on the surface of the boot, so I didn't have to think about that and have to readjust all the time. And then when I did that, I went over with another masking tape on top of that template that I had drawn with a Sharpie, and then I could place that piece of blue masking tape on the back side of the leather piece that I was going to cut out. After that was done, I just temporarily laid that leather piece on top of the surface just to see that it looks right, and I repeated that process all the different types of leather pieces that I was going to use for this boot. So we have two flaps here that are gray. This is a larger piece that goes around halfway to the front here and goes around here, and then it has more of an angled effect here. And then we have another gray leather piece that is going underneath that also has an angled shape here. And these ones are just hanging loose like this, and you can see the original stretchy elastic part here. They are just going to be like this to cover up the surface. This is also going to make it easier for you to slide into the boot without ruining the elasticity or the shape of the boot. And then we had like a piece here and a piece here. This side has the larger piece over here, and the other side has two separate pieces that overlaps here with a stitch. I made the back piece on this boot wider, but I think in the original these back pieces here are supposed to be a little bit narrower, but it was no issue. It still looks like the style in the show. Then we have the front piece here that is made of 3 leather pieces. So we have 2 side pieces, and then we have a center piece that is more beige tone, and these are more like light brown. And then we have the last and final step of all of these parts, and that's this part that is supposed to be the center front of the boot, that has a gray leather piece underneath, and then it has a light brown frame that goes all the way up. I am not really that sure how this part ends, if it ends with a straight leather piece over there or if it's just open like this, because you're not going to actually see this part anyways, because it's going to be covered up with the leg armor and the leather wrap on the opposite leg. Instead of having to attach these leather parts onto the masking tape using contact adhesive, I found actually a very strong leather tape that has a very strong sticky adhesive to the tape, and it's a double-sided tape. It's a very strong tape, and that was perfect. So I could just place that tape on top of the masking tape and then just attach the leather pieces, and they would stick right away. And you have to really rip these parts off if you want them to actually get removed. So that tape is very strong to actually keep these leather pieces in place, because I was a little bit worried that if I just use that tape that maybe these leather pieces won't actually stick to the boots, but they're like stuck on there. They're really attached to these boots now without actually destroying the boots. But before I actually used the tape, as soon as I realized what shapes I wanted of these leather pieces, I decided to sew them together. So first I'd sew these front parts together, these sides to the middle piece, and added just a simple straight stitch. Once that was done, I could add the side pieces that are here. We have this very large piece here, and then we have these two here. Also, you can see that this piece here is attached with this one on it. So this gray piece here is sewed to this piece here. So these ones are supposed to be sewn separately before they're sewn to this part here. And then as a final step, I sewed back piece to the side pieces. And after that was done, I sewed this gray flap here, supposed to be sewn to this leather piece here, just all the way down here, and then it's going to be open. So the rest is just a decorative stitch that is going the rest of the way. And then on the top you can see that I have actually folded the leather to give a much nicer edge that is more of a finished edge. This double stitch look is also repeated on this part here, but this one is sewn to this leather piece that is here and goes all the way up. And also you can see that these flaps are actually longer than the elastic piece on the boot. They're supposed to be a little bit higher than the ankle part. When all these parts have been sewn together, they're not sewn to the boot. I could just start attaching these parts with the double-sided leather tape. I think I started from the toe part and worked my way around until the entire boot was covered with these leather parts that are sewn together now. I think in some areas, since I had overlapped the masking tape underneath so it wouldn't actually leak any contact adhesive, I think I did attach some contact adhesive to some parts just to make sure that the leather pieces would stay in place. But I think the majority of the parts on the sides here by the sole, they are all attached using the double-sided leather tape. And before I attach this part, this one also has this framed leather piece around this gray piece. It's also sewn with a double stitch seam, and it's sewed separate from these parts. So this one is actually removable, this part. This is just attached with the double-sided leather tape. But before I attach this part, I decided to do the weathering effect on these boots, and it was a very simple weathering technique. I used just the rougher side of a kitchen sponge and also some nail file with a little bit of a rougher grit sandpaper. The grit on these sandpapers were like 120 grit, so they aren't very rough, but rough enough to remove some of the colors of the leather dye, so they would look more pale and worn and sun damaged and all that. And I also made sure that when I removed dye, for example when I went over with this nail file, I made sure that I focused on enhancing the look of the boot underneath. that you can see here, the shape here reveals that it has this elastic part of the Chelsea boot, and you can obviously see some of the shapes of the original boot underneath here, so it highlights the edges around the elastic part on the original boot, because that's the look they have of the original boots in the show. So I wanted to include that effect. If you have these kind of Chelsea boots, and just go over with a nail file and make sure that you focus on going over the edges of the elastic part, you're going to enhance this look and give it a sort of a highlight and then a deeper tone where the elastic part is. Once that's done, I attached the front part using the double-sided leather tape, and I did the same weathering technique on this one and enhanced the highlights of the gray part here, because I noticed in some of the pictures these gray leather pieces, especially up here, looked very damaged, looked very much like the surface of the leather started to peel off a bit. I didn't really quite get exactly that effect, but it looks very damaged and worn and weathered, so even though it's not 100% like they did, it's still going to give the same look of a very dirty, worn, old boot. When I was done using just the weathering technique with the sandpaper and the sponge, I still felt like it wasn't really getting that same color look that the boots had. It looked more like very light, like I had mahogany leather that was just getting some yellowish tone on the highlights that I had sanded down. So I wanted to create more of that look of dusty, dirty boots that has been in mud and in sand and dirt and anything like that. So what I decided to do was actually use some crushed soft pastels that I had. So I have these tiny pots that I had some soft pastels in, and I used the shades that were like yellow ochre, beige, the gray one, and I used a little bit of pan pastels in white just to get a dust sand coat on these boots to give them more of this grayish beigey tone, to remove some of those reddish tone, enhance more of that dirty look that it has been walking on Tatooine, for example, or just any kind of muddy environment. And when mud has dried, it isn't this dark brown shade, it has more of this light beigey grayish brown tone. So that's the look I was going for, and using water mixed in with some of those crushed soft pastels give that look of mud. So I used that on the soles of the boots, so when they dried it gave the look of dried up mud on the boots. And then when the boots were completely dry, I went over with a dry dust coat of those soft pastels. And I went over until I get to that kind of result that I was pleased with. Once I was happy, I could definitely see when I had applied that look to one of the boots and just had the other boot without that dusty effect, I noticed how much of a difference it actually made to add that kind of look of dusty, worn, mud-stained boots. So that's how I made these boots. Obviously, if you don't care about the boots you're going to use, then you don't have to use this process of masking tape method. You can just add a layer of contact adhesive and just attach these leather pieces permanently to the boots. But you're still going to have to do this sewing parts on the side, because that's much easier. Sew these parts separately and then glue them to the boots. I am, however, gonna try and make some templates of these parts. You definitely have to do some adjustments if you have larger feet, but they are going to show the basic patterns of the leather pieces that are on these boots. And then from there you can adjust it a bit so it fits the length of the boots and the width that you're using. Other than that, it's a pretty simple style to create on these boots. Luckily, they are supposed to look very worn and damaged and been used a lot, so you don't have to worry about getting a nice finish on these. So just play around with it, especially if the stitches look very damaged, that they are starting to peel off a bit. This is going to enhance the look of these boots being through a lot also, so you don't have to worry about getting some kind of very perfect finish on these. The rougher the better for these boots. That's what's great about these. You don't have to worry about getting too even application or even finish or anything like that on these. And the more wrinkles these leather pieces has, the better too, because that's what leather looks like when it has been used and worn. And don't be afraid if the original boot underneath show through the colors of the leather, because that's exactly what it looked like in the show. So that's just going to improve the look of these boots even more. So that's how you create your own Mandalorian boots. They are very simple to make. It's all about just getting the right material. And then it's all about knowing the steps on how to apply all of these leather pieces and then just create the warm weathered effect, and you're ready to use them for your own Mandalorian costume.